The power of the breath. Why should you do breath work? The transformation it's had in my life, and much more. Welcome to the Awesome Human Podcast, your path to total human optimization. Ready to unleash your 100%? Let's go. Welcome back to the Awesome Human Podcast. Very different again. This is only my second guest ever on the show, but I've got into breathwork so much and it plays such a integral and transformative role in my health, in my personal development, everything. I wanted to get a guest onto the show. Me and Mike met, I don't know, probably about 3 years ago in a business mastermind. He has a YouTube channel that's crushing it with over 250,000 followers. So it's only natural to get Mike Maher onto the show. Mike, hello.
Hello, Ben. How you doing?
Mate, I'm buzzing. I'm excited to get into the breath.
Yeah, let's do it.
Mate, before we do, a little bit about yourself. What got you into breathing beyond the daily?
I had anxiety throughout my corporate career, and the very short, at least boring version I'll give you is I went through a divorce, had a bit of a midlife crisis at 35, and then found out that there was a man called the Iceman, also known as Wim Hof, and you could go and spend time with him. And I was like, well, I've never done anything like that. That sounds mental. So I booked a ticket to spend a week on his retreat in 2016, and I didn't go there for the breath work. Went there for the cold exposure. Oh, I'm really scared of the cold, and for some reason I want to see if I can master that. But it was not the cold; it was me just in a basement huffing and puffing with Wim, and I just started crying. I was like, "The hell's going on here? Did he slip me some drugs or something?" And that was the start of me just getting obsessed with breath work.
And you got to do that with women in person, because it's quite hard to do that now, isn't it?
I'd imagine so. There was 60 of us, mostly dudes, a couple of women, but mostly dudes. And it was a week with Wim. It was in a hotel. He was sleeping there. You'd have had breakfast opposite him twice, dinner next to him. You know, people were a little bit shy about talking to him. I was like, right, I'm going to ask this guy loads of questions. And he's just accessible to you the whole time. And it was at night, you'd have a few beers with him as well. And so the whole thing was just a really great experience.
I'd love to meet him. He's a very positive force in the world, in my opinion. And when I saw him on stage about 18 months ago, just his message and the way that he speaks his truth, which we need more of in the world, was just very empowering as someone in the audience that's in the space of trying to help other people like you are. So you did the retreat, and then what? You were like, oh, I'll do a breathwork course, like, because you haven't been doing this since 2016, have you?
Pretty much, actually. So what happened was, so in my old life, corporate gig, 20 years, middle manager, all that sort of stuff, just fell into it. And but at university, I did video production. So I wanted to be next Spielberg, and that never happened. But what I did do, which was a really close second, was I started filming wedding videos. That was ace. And obviously, at the end of doing like 30, 40 weddings, you've seen it all. So I do wedding videos as a side gig. So I was already playing with YouTube a little bit, and I knew how to edit, and I had all the kit and stuff. And anyway, fast forward a week after the Wim Hof retreat, I'm back home, I'm back at work, and I'm like, oh, I want to do the breath work. I want to do it. And I'm trying to do it, and it's not the same. You know, you had Wim standing over you, screaming, breathe, and that's not there. You've not got people all around you, and it just wasn't the same. And so I thought, let me see if I can make a breathing video that I can play and listen to and help me get those deeper breaths in. And I shared it with my friend. I put it on YouTube. And then I thought, I'll just share it in a couple of the Wim Hof Facebook groups that I was in. And then I was just saying this to somebody there. I forgot about it. I would just use it for myself. And it was about a year later when my now wife said, you know, you've got like 1,000 followers on YouTube now. And I was like, what? And there was like, I don't know, 10,000 views on this video. And I was like, oh, that's mental. So that's where it all started. So that first Wim Hof video I posted was, probably January 2017. And that's when the channel really started.
Because when I do my breath work, I use one of your videos, and I use the same one every time. And I've spoken about this before on the podcast. The reason I do that is because, so you made a video and it was Wim Hof talking, and it's looped 5 times. And for me, that's really important, because I believe that the power of the breath is about going into self, exploring self, connecting with self, and being led by your intuition. And in the modern world, I feel too many people are led by their brain in that they're trying to think their way out of every situation. So when they do breath work, because they're used to using the brain, they're counting, oh, 1 breath, 2 breath, 3 breath. But because you're doing that, you lose the beauty of flowing through the experience, about truly experiencing and evolving and letting your intuition guide you down the path that you need to be guided down. So when I listen to your playlist, I'm able to zone out because I know the pattern. And it's very inspiring as well, because Wim's video is just great, and he's obviously an OG at this. And I share it with a lot of people because I'm like, you need to learn how to go within. And if you don't use something that allows you to go within, you're not really going to get the benefit of some of the amazingness of breathwork.
Yeah. There's a few levels I've uncovered on this. So you're absolutely right. I've kind of put it down to 3 now. So you've kind of got like, you're in your head. That's probably the big one where most people are. In fact, I do it the other way around. You're in your head. You can huff and puff and what would we call that? Like over amplify the breath, and you can escape. You can disappear. I've disappeared into outer space with some breathing, and it's wonderful. It's really, really wonderful. But there is a level in between those two, which is being in the body, and this is the sweet spot. And so it's really easy to over amplify and shoot off into space. But if you can, and this is where it gets a little bit more advanced, if you can regulate the breath a little bit with practice, you can stay within the body and you feel what the body's going through and you're in the present moment. That for me is the sweet spot of breathing, where you're not stuck in the busy mind, but you've also not disassociated completely as well. And that is where I think the magic truly happens, because you're feeling the body. And the thing is, this is what somebody explained to me. You're in a body, you might as well feel it, because there's so much information going on here. There's so much nuance and like the fact that you've been given this amazing gift, but we get so stuck up in the mind for so long. And so, yeah, I'm glad you said that, because the breath is one of the most powerful ways to get out of this monkey mind.
I believe that it almost is so simple talking about the breath that's why people don't find it accessible, because it's almost like, well, I breathe, so like, dude, there can't be that much that I need to kind of explore. But going back for me, you teach people with the breath every day. How should we view the breath? What types of breath work are there? Almost like educate us on the journey with the breath. How should we start to think about it?
Yeah, so you could split it into two really terms. You've got breath work and breathing, and they're very different. It's a bit like just living and then going to the gym and doing exercises. You know, yes, you're moving your body when you're walking down the street and stuff, but that's very different to a specific exercise you might do with a personal trainer. So you've got breathing and breath work. And then there's probably thousands of breathing exercises out there, which is crazy, right? Because it's just like in and out. You know, so my mother-in-law says, what's he talking about? It's in and out. You can add holds and you can elongate exhales and you can make things shorter and longer, and you can do a bit of nose, bit of mouth, and you can do all this different stuff. But from the most purest, simple point of view, there really is only 2 things you can do. You can breathe. So right now, you and I are breathing. So we're not doing, unless you're tricking me and you're doing a breath hold or something. So we're just breathing right now, and you're probably breathing anywhere from sort of 12 to 20 breaths every minute. And then we've got 2 sets of exercises. So up above that, you would have hyperventilation, so breathing more than you need. And below that, you've got hypoventilation, breathing less than you need. And so the most simplest term when it comes to breathing exercises, you've really only got that scale to play with. And so like a Wim Hof breathing exercise would be taking more breaths than you would actually need to take. And something like one of my favorites, coherence breathing, would bring you down to about 6 breaths a minute, and that'd be less than you need. And that is what a lot of people refer to as a breath spectrum. And you can play between those. But they all have benefits and disadvantages as well. But that's the overarching thing. Breathwork, breathing exercises, more than you need, less than you need.
Got it. Love that. So when or how do we know what end of the scale to kind of almost advance with? Do I need to go hypo or hyper? Where and what and why?
Yeah. So I started hyper. So I went straight into the deep end with Wim Hof. And the short version is this. The beautiful thing about us humans is that we're all completely unique, and you'll know this with supplements and with diet and even exercise. We all need something a little bit different, and so there isn't really a one size fits all breathwork approach either, because we're at different places in our lives. And so when I did the Wim Hof stuff, felt great in the moment, and I went back home and I would do Wim Hof breathing every day before work, and I'd be in the car and I'd be freaking going for it, and I'd get a little bit of bliss, and I'd go into work and I'd get a bit of peace for sometimes a couple of hours, but the anxiety would come back. And I didn't really question it. I thought, oh, I need to do more Wim Hof breathing. Go and do it in the toilet, go to the disabled toilet, do some breathing. But what I realized over a long enough time scale, probably about 2 years, was this isn't really helping solve anything. It's almost like a band-aid for me. And so that's when I started to explore some of these different techniques, which were able to then reduce my anxiety and stress like long term. And I had to fix the fundamentals of my breathing. But for some people, they need to blow off stress. And so for some people, some clients I work with, they don't want to slow the breath down. They've got all this freaking energy and they've got to get out of the system. And so we've got to get them to move, shake, tap, and hyperventilate to get that out of their system so they can finally relax. And the analogy I'll give you is Shavasana at the end of yoga. Like, you don't do that at the start of yoga. It wouldn't work. If I said lay down still, we always do that at the end. And it's you've put your body through something, you've moved it, you've exhausted it, and then you deserve that rest at the end. And so for some people, they're carrying so much cortisol and adrenaline and energy, they need to blow it off. But for some other people who are hyperventilating all day and they're breathing through the mouth and they're tired and they're exhausted and they're dehydrated, we've got to slow them down. And so part of my work is trying to figure out where are you and what do you specifically need. And that's what keeps my brain interested.
Interesting. So when I first started with the breath work, I started hypo. So I was in a bad place, long COVID. My central nervous system was wide on. I needed to calm down. It was go, go, go. I started with breath hold training and just doing some nervous system regulation alongside the breath. And then I was engaging in yoga nidra and just sort of really slowing the breath down, like you might say, with the sort of 6 breaths a minute as like a target, which I know James Nestor talks about in his book, Breathe. And then the Wim Hof stuff came along through a similar practitioner that I was working with. He was like, do you want to come to a workshop? So I was like, yeah, let's go to the workshop. And then I started to use the hyperventilation as a process of exploring self. And that's only because I kind of discovered that by accident. Like, I went to this workshop and I was like, oh my God, I was like visualizing things. I was shaking. I cried. Like, I'm like, all of that happened in an hour of breath work. I felt like I had an exorcism of character. And that's how I've used breath work. I don't know if you would use that, view that as a kind of optimal or whatever, but it's played such a positive role for me. So how would you frame the benefit of hyperventilation type breath work?
So what's interesting is I don't think anybody really can truly identify what's happening in the brain, but the way it's been described to me is like sometimes a switch will go off and you'll reset. So when we breathe faster, one of the things that tends to happen, what people report, is the mental chatter will quiet down. So what we might know sometimes is the left part or the more analytical part of the brain will go a little bit quieter. And what that's doing is it's allowing the more right side, the more intuition side to come forward, which we might somehow suppress with our analytical mind. We live in such a weird analytical world these days with spreadsheets and data that we've lost, especially in the West, a lot of how we should feel. So when we overventilate, hyperventilate, one of the things that happens is we are moving the body, we are putting it through some stress, and on the other side of that stress is relaxation. And when we hear stress, people are like, oh, I don't want to feel stressed, but think about a sauna, think about a weight session, think about running on a treadmill. We're putting ourselves through some controlled stress, and at the end of that, we feel like, oh, I'm relaxed. I've moved my body, I've moved the system, my heart rate went up, my adrenaline went up, all these different things. But again, the spectrum is so beautiful. Like, everybody's got to find what works for them. But for some people, it's like I'm already hyperventilating 24 hours a day. What happens if I slow it down? And again, some people, they say, no, let's keep going. Let's push further. Let's push through where you currently are. And so I don't do that. I don't teach that. But some people say, no, let's keep going. Let's keep pushing. Even when they're stressed, let's keep blowing through. And some people have good reports of that as well. But I just feel like, let's slow it. Most of us need to slow it down. We're all breathing a bit too quick these days. So generally with clients, what I'll do is we'll assess them. We'll go through a protocol to restore functional breathing. We'll get them nice and chilled and get their nervous system nice and balanced. And then we'll explore some of these more sexy techniques, these faster techniques, once we've got a really solid foundation. But some people don't want to do that. Look, I want to have a good cry. I want to have a good shake. I want to get that out my system. And that's beautiful as well. We've all got this ability to choose what we want to do.
So I want to talk about the attraction to some of these things, like doing a breath session, so half an hour, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever, because what I feel is lost in a lot of modern day society is there's no ritualistic element to our life anymore of like letting experiences pass through us and having clarity. So you probably would have read up on how the theory of trauma being stored in the body is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And because in modern culture, especially through past generations, it's getting a lot better now. There's now this like, feel emotions, allow emotions to come through, like don't just bottle it up. And we've had generations of people just bottling up how they feel, becoming, very angry, diseased, stressed, etc. And for me, like when I go and do a breath session, whether I'm on my own or I'm with a group, it feels very primal. It
Yeah.
feels very restorative. It feels very exploratory. And that's what I absolutely love about it. I feel like I'm working with the power of my physiology, and it's just the breath. That's it. And during that, if I talk to you about the last breath session I did, like during that last breath session, I explored so many different thoughts and emotions. I experienced so much in just 25 minutes. And at the end of it, I'm calm. I feel like I've got a clear sense of thought. The brain chat has gone right down. And I'm like, in 30 minutes, I feel like I unpacked and worked through so much in my life.
Yeah.
And I think the attraction here, and this is where ice baths and getting out in nature and grounding, like people are now starting to get towards more primal, humanistic practices that allow their body to do and feel what it's naturally designed to do and should do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think James Nestor puts this best. He says, the modern world is conspiring against us. And I think that's a really powerful term. And so you might have come across terms like ancestral living, ancestral health. Biohacking's big into this right now. And so the breath just forms part of whatever we want to call this movement. You're right. It's like your feet is on the ground. You're getting daylight in your eyes, all these things that may even be a bit woo-woo. In fact, something I even learned this week, which has just blown my mind, is I'm doing a lot of fascia work at the moment, which is, are you familiar with fascia? This skin onesie that's been described to me, all inside you. And the way that one of these fascia people explains, like if you've got like a knot here on your skin onesie, your foot might hurt. The whole thing's kind of connected, which is really interesting. And so anyway, I interviewed a fascia expert on my podcast this week, and she was saying like the feet are so connected to your breath. And if your feet are tight, and your feet can't get good purchase of the ground, well, that's first of all going to send signals to your brain. This isn't safe. Something's wrong here, because our feet are feeling everything. So if your feet are tight, the arches are tight, you're more likely to be in a fight and flight state. But even moving that to one side for a second, if the arches are tight, a fascia connection, I think they called it like a meridian line to your diaphragm and your lungs and your heart and your jaw, the whole thing is tighter. And so just by doing some work with like a tennis ball or a fascia ball on your feet is going to relax your breathing system. And so it's all these little things that I heard about reflexology years ago, and I thought, this is rubbish. How could doing anything to your feet affect anything else in your body? But it turns out the more that people start to look into this work, this is working. Touching the ground has scientific benefits. Being out in daylight, breathing properly. There's all these little elements of ancestral health. And generally, all we've got to do is look backwards at a few generations. Same with food. You've probably heard eat how your grandparents would have eaten. Like if you think about how our food is today, we can get down all these rabbit holes. But the thing about the breath is it cuts through everything, because when you hyperventilate or you breathe slowly, I've got a friend that's coined this term. He says your rate determines your state. And I love that. So he's one of my business partners. And so how you breathe is actually affecting how you think and feel. And we can change the breath like that. So yes, we can change how we feel with drugs and alcohol and Netflix and sex and all these different things, but we can also change it quite rapidly just by changing what our lungs do.
Yeah, I'm quite bullish at the moment, and I'd say I need to and plan to be even more bullish we're now talking about energy, because so many people want more energy, and how people describe it is kind of different. And unfortunately in the modern world, energy is almost like, oh, have I had enough coffee or not? That's as far as it goes. And it's like, instead of a coffee, your thought process could go to the breath. It could go to just getting away from the technology that you're sitting in front of. It could be outside. It could be your feet touching the grass. It could be some movement. It could be tapping. I'm a fan of like tapping and swinging and just like vibrating your body and swinging it around. I'm like, there's so many tools that we've got that I would say are probably more effective than going and getting the coffee. And again, it's us getting back to our baseline state. If you say, oh, I'm tired, I need a coffee, you are outsourcing your energy. You are giving away your power. Whereas if I say, oh, my mood's a little bit low, I don't feel quite right. What can I do to fix that? Oh, how's
Mm.
my breath? Oh, when was the last time I went outside? Oh, when was the last time I felt fresh air on my skin? When was the last time I did something that was very human to do? Move, breathe, be free of technology. And I just feel we're missing so many simple tools, like something as simple as doing 5 minutes of breath work to completely change our mental and emotional state.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think to build on that as well, like when your breathing's off, then everything's off. It's your main fuel source. The oxygen is the main fuel source. Yes, we need water, we need sleep, and we need food, but we need oxygen first, which is why if you choke on a sandwich, your brain's paying attention pretty quickly. It's the fact that you can't breathe. There's an instant connection between the brain and the lungs. And so it's our primary fuel source. And again, according to Nesta, 95% of us have got something wrong with our breathing, which is astounding. You think, how can that be possible? It's the thing that I do all day. But our ancestors did not sit in chairs on computers with chronic stress. They were, chewing for hours. They were playing, they were swinging, they were sprinting, they were doing all these things. And we are very sedentary, and that massively affects our breath. TV shows with like superheroes with tight bellies. Kids, I've got my little one, he's 2. He's observing everything we do, copies all the bad words that I say, everything, right? And so we're just looking at our elders and go, oh, if that's how they breathe, that's how I'll breathe. Perfect example. He saw one of his grandmas the other day, and she was like, oh, she'd hurt her back, and she started bending down like a weird way to pick some book. He started mimicking like her bad posture. I was like, it just blew my mind. So we live in a weird world where we're not optimized for human healthy optimization living. On top of that, we've got all these poor role models. We've got chronic stress. But you're right. That one of the most positive things, 'cause I always like to stay positive with this because you could get down a real doom and gloom hole here. There's a psychologist I interviewed called Dr. Blissa Veranich, and she works for UFC fighters to help their breathing. She wrote a book called Breathing for Warriors. So she works with like firefighters and first responders, and she's a no-nonsense breathwork expert. And she said, your body knows how to breathe properly, and it wants to breathe properly. We just got to remind it how. And that's most of the work I'll do with people is, yes, we can come to breathing exercises and what I might call break glass in case of emergency techniques, or we could do some transformative breath work, which I know you're a big fan of. But the big stuff that we really work on these days here is restoring that functional, beautiful breathing. And then suddenly when that happens, things like energy return because we start to sleep better. And when we're sleeping better and we're breathing better, guess what? You've got more chance of actually eating properly and going to the gym. And so for me, the foundation is the breath, then it's the sleep, and then we put all the other stuff on top of that, because when you're tired and you're not breathing properly, it's really hard to get all the other things optimized.
So how do people recognize if they are not breathing very well, and what are some first steps that they can do to improve it?
So we can do assessments, but I think generally speaking, if you just take a little bit of time to just notice your breath, and most of us have never done this, I'm sure people listening to the podcast are more aware of this than the general public, let's say, but it was only after Wim Hof that I got back to work, and I was in a meeting where I was being told off for something. We'd done something wrong on a project. And for the first time, I was like, I was really aware that I was shallow breathing, and I was clearly doing it my entire life, but coming back from a breathing retreat and suddenly being aware of your lungs, I was like, what's going on here? Why am I? And it was the stress of the meeting that put me into a fight or flight state, and just was not aware of it. So the first thing we often teach is awareness, and it's almost a meditation. So for most people, I say, right, just close your eyes, one hand on the chest, one hand on the belly, and let's just notice the breath for a few minutes. And for some people, that's quite terrifying because we're so used to stimulation, just to be in and notice the breath. And so we'll spend a bit of time getting comfortable with that. And we might even do it for 60 seconds. And we'll say, okay, let's just notice how the pace of the breath feels. And we're not judging it, we're not making it wrong, but let's just notice how quickly or slow those breaths are coming in. And let's notice where the breath is. Are we feeling it more here, more in the belly, more in the chest? And so a bit like a sat nav is useless if it doesn't know where it is. You can put in where you're trying to get to. The first thing we normally teach people is like, well, let's just start to be aware of what our body's doing. And then from there, we can start to go, okay, I actually feel a bit tight in the chest, or my heart feels a bit heavy, or I notice I'm sucking my belly in, or, fill in the blank, there'll be some things. And then we can do assessments. We can get a tape measure out. We can see how many steps you can do while you're holding your breath. There's so many assessments we can do to understand this. And then from there, what I'll do is build a personalized plan with them. So a bit like a PT or physiotherapist. The work we do is very, very specialist. So we're working with a client for between 90 days and a year. And in that period of time, we're really getting into the nitty gritty and trying to fit it into their lifestyle. But for anybody watching this that's not in that position, you would start off with just trying a few different techniques. Like, how do I feel if I do some faster breathing? How do I feel if I bring the breath down to 6 breaths a minute? So it's a bit of a discovery. It's a bit of time just playing with different techniques. And so I held my breath and I just felt really stressed. So, okay, let's not do that then. Let's not do breath holds right now. Let's try some box breathing or some coherence breathing, or let's try something like breath of fire, which is a little bit quicker. And we just play with the breath. So for most people, it's a little bit of trial and error. And that can be a bit overwhelming with breath work because, again, there's thousands of breathing techniques. But if we bring it home, the most important thing is just have that awareness. Like, how do I feel in my body? How does my breath feel? Is it easy to breathe or is it a bit hard to breathe?
That's I suppose, a big reason I wanted to do this podcast, because I want to shine as much of a light on breath work as possible, because there's so many, in my experience, ways that the breath interacts with our physiology. And we've already talked about, some of them already. Before we started recording, for the first time ever last night, I used a nose tape during my sleep. And I woke up with it this morning and I took it off. I was like, oh, I do not like this. And I've had my nose broken quite a few times, and just no one's ever said to me, have you tried a nose strip? Like, it's just, for whatever reason. And now that I've taken it off, it's been about 90 minutes since I've taken it off. I can now feel more tension around the side of my head because I can feel myself trying to breathe harder. So if the listener, think about this. Every breath I make, I'm now trying to work, let's just hypothetically say 25% harder, which means my muscles are now having to draw that in rather than the breath just sort of naturally coming in and out, in and out. And I'm really aware of it talking to you now. And I'm like, almost want to go and put a nose strip on. Now, not everyone needs a nose strip because not everyone has, what would be the word, a disfigured or abnormal?
Deviated septum is normally what they'll say. There's a collapse in one of the sides. Yeah.
Cool. And I can only assume that's like what I've got. I've just never had it diagnosed. I've never pushed to explore it. I also had asthma as a kid, and terrible asthma. Like, I was taking steroid, like the brown inhaler, like 4 times a day. And really fortunate that my mum, who has been very much into alternative health for a long time, tried to look for different answers, and she took me to a Buteyko technique practitioner, and I did the Buteyko technique for like 3 or 4 months, 1-to-1, once a week, and it got rid of my asthma. Like, literally, steroids gone, inhaler gone, everything gone. And I was like, and that dominated my childhood, having asthma. Like, I couldn't walk anywhere without an inhaler, couldn't go to my grandma's house without lying on the sofa all week because she had cats and it made it really bad. And I'm just like, it has such an effect on us. It's blowing my mind.
Yeah, I think the nose strips, they on the box, they claim to give about 33% more space. So it's like getting a third nostril. That's the best way of putting those nasal strips. Why do we want to breathe through the nose? There's so many benefits to it. And the study that I'll reference, which just brings this to life, is when James Nestor was writing the book Breath, he wanted to test nose breathing versus mouth breathing. And Stanford said it's too unethical, even though I think he said like 56% of Americans breathe this way anyway. So he and another guy I've interviewed called Anders Olsen, they bunged up their nose for 10 days and they just breathed through their mouth and they just tested everything. They're really interesting. So they worked, slept, exercised, all being mouth breathers. And a couple of the stats that I can remember is Nestor's snoring went from about 4 minutes to 4 hours a night. His blood pressure went up, I think, 20% just by opening his mouth and breathing through his mouth. Shocking. And the scariest one of all was when he was getting his blood work done at the end. They said, and he had no signs of this before, his blood work had become pre-diabetic just because of the stress he'd put his body through in 10 days. Now, the positive, they flipped it and then they taped up for 10 days the mouth and they breathed through the nose and they recovered everything again. So the body's really, we know this, the body's so adaptable and it's always trying to get back to its health baseline. We get in our own way sometimes. But those nasal strips are so powerful. So I will wear them in the gym. I will wear them when I'm doing jiu-jitsu. I'll wear them when I go to bed if I'm feeling stuffy. My wife wore them all throughout pregnancy. She was snoring all the time, bless her. So that really helped with that as well. And all my clients, pretty much the first thing we'll do is like, right, before we even start working together, I want you to get some nasal strips and I want you to get some mouth tape. And we're going to see what happens at night if we put some tape on your mouth. And if you wake up on the first night and that tape's on your forehead or on the pillow, then we know you need the mouth tape. So we'll do things like that. And if people are thinking, what the hell is he talking about? It's very, very safe. A little bit of tape over the lips. We're not gaffer tape in the jaw, teeny little bit of 3M micro pore tape. And it's just naturally encouraging the breath to stay in the nose. And generally what you'll find is at some point in the night, people kind of rip open the tape because they're hungry for air. But when we use the nasal strips and we encourage nasal breathing, people start to get deeper levels of sleep. Their REM goes up, their deep sleep goes up. They're less likely to go for a tinkle in the night. And so suddenly now they're breathing properly when they're sleeping. They're recovering their breath. They're more efficient, but also the sleep's deeper. So they wake up more refreshed in the morning. Just one other thing I'll say in the nose, which everybody knows this, but like when you're a kid and it's really cold outside and you want to pretend to be a dragon, or you pretend you're smoking because you think you're cool when you're 7 and you got, it's really cold out there, or you're trying to fog up a mirror. How do you do it? We all know we go like, and we breathe out through the mouth. And so even as like a little 7-year-old, the best way to get moisture out of your body is through the mouth, not through the nose. And so when we want to not dehydrate in the night or when we're exercising, we've got to keep the mouth closed. So this whole in through the nose, out through the mouth is probably one of the biggest breath myths that exists. That's reserved for high-end, high-intensity interval training athletes. But for most of us mere mortals, we're good enough just breathing through the nose when we work out. But if you put a little nasal strip on, it just gives you that third nostril.
That's interesting. So I'm working with a breath coach at the moment, and it's not you. I feel a little dirty saying it. I feel like I'm cheating. I've been working with him for a little while now, and we've started mouth taping at night, but I haven't got any of the micro pore tape yet. I've ordered it. So I've been using a different tape, and it's not very good. It keeps coming off. So I've been waking up in the middle of the night, and the tape's like on my head or whatever, as you've described. And I feel thirsty. But last night, using the nose strip, I think I slept all through the night, breathed through my nose all through the night. Because I woke up twice in the night because we've got poorly kids and didn't feel thirsty at all, whereas usually I would. It's quite interesting. I also didn't wake up with like as bad a headache. I've got some myofascial issues with my neck at the moment, so I get headaches quite regularly. But if I don't breathe right, then it exacerbates it all, like a lot more. It's so powerful.
Yeah, and it's so non-invasive as well. It's like a little strip. I mean, the other way you can do it is there's little things called nasal dilators that'll go up the nose, and they're great for sport because I think they're claiming 47% space when you put those in.
Wow.
So they're not very good for sleep because they're too wide and they'll actually dry your nose out. But if you like to go hard in the gym and you're trying to keep your mouth closed, nasal dilators are really useful for that as well. Sometimes I've got a little tiny gym in my garage. I know myself, I'll get carried away. I've got one of those little bikes with a fan on it and I'm pushing and I get a little bit like air hungry. And so I'll put a little bit of tape on when I'm working out as well, because it's just another way to kind of just remind my brain, let's keep the mouth closed. The best advice I got was from a running coach, breathwork / running coach. And I was asking him, how do we breathe when we exercise? And he said, best thing you can do is let your breath dictate your pace. So if I start to go for a run or I'm on the cross trainer or I'm lifting weights and I start to feel air hungry, just knock it down a couple of degrees, slow it down a little bit. And that's frustrating for a lot of like athletes and semi-pro athletes because they want to go hard. But it's a bit of a tortoise and a hare situation, because if we just slow it down a little bit and allow the breath to catch up and improve, what will happen is your CO2 tolerance, basically how good you are at holding your breath, will increase. And you'll end up being a lot faster with your nose than you would be as a mouth breather. To a degree, ultimately, you're going to get to a certain point where you can't bring in enough oxygen. But for most of us, just by staying nasal, we are helping our breathing system adapt. So diaphragm, lungs, but also CO2 tolerance, all these things. When we open the mouth, we're kind of doing a little bit of a reset. So it's great if we're really out of breath. Like sometimes I'm doing jiu-jitsu and I'm getting battered by somebody like 30 kilograms heavier than me. I'm out through the mouth. I'm just trying to recover. And it's like being an asthmatic. But if I can stay nasal, then I'm maintaining or improving. And if you're an absolute sadistic person, when you're out of breath, you can hold your breath. And that's like uber level, like breath work. So an example would be Laird Hamilton, big pro wave surfer who I've interviewed. What this nutter will do is he'll be in the sauna and he's got a air bike and he's wearing oven gloves and he's getting himself as out of breath as he can. And then he'll jump in his pool and hold the dumbbells and he'll go under the water while out of breath. and see how long he can hold his breath underwater. Obviously, we don't do this. This is a professional I'm talking about here. And what he's doing is he is training his CO2 tolerance to a ridiculous level, because when he's surfing, if he gets carried under those waves, he might be under those waves for a couple of minutes. He needs to stay calm. He needs to be able to hold his breath for a really long time. So he's training himself to be at that level. So really, when you're doing any sort of sport, you've got those 3 levels. It's like, I need to reset. Let's use the mouth. I'm really exhausted. I'm going to stay nasal, which may give me some benefits, but it will definitely maintain where I am. Or I can slow the breath or hold the breath, and then suddenly my CO2 tolerance is going to get a lot stronger.
What a legend. Wow. I think I've seen a video of that like years and years and years ago, but it sounds like he's taken it next level with the sauna, the bike, the other gloves.
He looks great. I think he's 60 or 62. He looks fantastic. And I was listening to who was I listening to today? I was listening to the guy that played Thanos. What's his name? Josh Brolin. So Josh Brolin was on the Joe Rogan podcast. He was talking about his life, and he mentioned Laird like 4 times. And so when you're in that world, the Joe Rogan kind of world, and you're in that part of the world as well, like America, a lot of these guys know Laird because Laird's big into breathwork. He's got a breathwork company. He does all the psychedelic breathwork as well. He's often referenced as a bit of a guru in the breathing space. And I was really lucky to get him on the podcast because it was when the pandemic hit, and I think he was just a bit bored because I just don't think I'd get him on there now. He's such a big, important player. But yeah, he came on, I think it was episode 6 or something, and he spent an hour with me talking about the breath, which was pretty cool.
Oh, amazing. So I'll only touch on it briefly because I don't think it'll be relevant to a large amount of the audience, because I want to keep this very as practical as possible, and we'll wrap up in a minute with like, where should people go, what should they do, what should they find? We've used psychedelics with the breath a little bit, but only microdosing, and the opinion that I've come across with most breath coaches is that if you take the compound too far, then you're going to struggle to actually control the breath, use the breath, and actually guide yourself. I'm just interested in what your experience of that has been, whether you recommend it, whether you explore it.
I've never done psychedelics yet. I'll put the yet in there. Although since I've had a kid now, that yet seems like a lot further away. But I have had some insane experiences with breath work that didn't involve any psychedelics. I can't really speak to like what you should take and how much and all that. But what I can say is when you do very long hyperventilation work with a good practitioner, you can have some incredible experiences. I've been in outer space. I've had conversations with beings that I don't know where they came from. Maybe it's in my mind, maybe it's elsewhere. But I think the most interesting of all was I did a rebirthing about 2 years ago. And for those that don't know what that is, getting into, again, you do this with a professional. You never do this by yourself. You get into hot water. That's the same temperature as your body. And you have a snorkel and you go face down in the water and you're being held. And you're hyperventilating, which again is very dangerous if you do it by yourself, but you do it with professionals. Okay, so I had 2 people holding me. They're playing the womb noise while you're doing this, and you're hyperventilating. And so you got all these triggers, all these things going on. And the short version of what happened to me was I was underwater, I was doing the breathing, and I remember thinking, this is BS. I'm very science grounded with the breath. Nothing's going to happen to me. But I'll do it because I've been invited to do it, and I really respect the woman that's doing it. So let's just see what happens. And I could hear a little girl screaming as I was doing this. And I thought, why is something like this is my session? I got really annoyed because it was like we were taking in turns. I was like, who's like stealing the limelight as I'm doing? And it turns out it was me at the end of every exhale. For the last little bit of the exhale, I was just screaming. And then I went into what I can only describe as a trance situation, and I went through the full rebirthing experience. I was like a little baby. They couldn't get me out of the water. When they did and they turned me over, I wasn't breathing. In fact, my lips went blue. And I eventually took a massive breath and I just started crying. And this whole experience, I'm not joking, I probably did 15 minutes of breathing before. So not much, not like an hour, like 15 minutes of deep breathing. And the whole process lasted about 3 hours. So I was taken out. I had these tiny little baby T-Rex hands. I went through this whole experience, and they do all these things. So for example, when you come out of the water, they'll say things like, your mum's here now, and they'll put you next to the woman, and she'll be like, and then she'll say stuff like, I'm so glad you're here. And I was just wailing as you're saying that. It's like, you're so wanted. I don't really think anybody really fully understands what's going on in this process. It might be hypnosis. It might be healing generational trauma. It might be something spiritual. I don't know. But all I can say is I went through this incredible experience without any drugs, with a little bit of breathing under the guidance of these people. And it's still one of my like top 5 most profound experiences in my life, just doing that rebirth. And so, yeah, it's powerful. Off the back end of it, I was altered for about 2 weeks. I was in my garage just doing some weights, and I just burst into tears. So I didn't integrate for a while. So you have to be careful if you've got any mental health concerns or schizophrenia. This is not the breathing technique for you. But I think for people curious, it's worth looking into it, because, yeah, I don't know what happened, and I would love to do it again at some point, but you don't really need the psychedelics to have a really powerful experience, because the breath can take you to some magical places.
No, I totally concur with that. And I'd say when it's just mostly been the breath for me, it almost feels kind of more pure, more personal, like even deeper. And I've done it with various different things. And I suppose what we're talking to here is the body's ability to go into a DM or release DMT in the breath. That's what's hypothesized, right?
Yeah.
But I could see how the rebirthing thing would be very transformative, because you're almost like, in theory, in my head right now, you're going right back to birth. And it's like, you now have the ability mentally and emotionally to start again.
Yes.
And we can get rid of all of that imprint in a way.
Yeah.
Like, I get how that could be very freeing. And I've done a lot of trauma work, inner child work over the last couple of years. And I could definitely see how that would be insanely powerful.
Yeah.
I'm sold. I'm in.
Yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. I think there's a lot we still don't know, and the DMT is a great one. I think that's what's happening as well. From what I've read, and I've understood a bit about DMT, and I've seen some stuff, and I've had these crazy experiences, and maybe that's what's happening when we're dying. We get this lovely release, and DMT is in everything, but there's no evidence that I'm aware of yet to kind of back it up. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But we just scientifically, I think James Nestor was actually trying to go into an MRI machine and do hyperventilation work to see if they could find something like that. And so I don't believe yet they found it, but that doesn't mean that something like that magical isn't happening, because some crazy stuff is happening when we do these deep breathing techniques. We're having some big experiences. The Wim Hof one, when I did the first long breathing session, so it was only 20 of us. Wim was screaming, you're breathing as much as you can. I think I was about an hour and a half into a breathing session with him. And suddenly, after like a load of floods of tears, just this entity came to me, and all it said was, "I'm so glad you're here." Actually, I've never connected that to what that woman just said in rebirthing. That's really weird. That's really weird, actually. So it said, "I'm so glad you're here," and it went, "See you later," and it just went off again. And I was like, "What the hell was that? Did I make that up? Was that in my head? What was going on here?" And yeah, that was 8 years ago, and it's still one of the big effects as well. Did I get into another realm? Did I do what you might do with DMT? Did I get to speak to some ancestors? Or did my brain just make it up because it thought it was dying? Because when we hyperventilate, we dramatically reduce oxygen to the brain, like dramatically. People think we're super oxygenating everything by breathing deep. The opposite is true. We're actually doing something called the Bohr effect and restricting blood flow, making our blood pressure go up and tightening everything. But in reducing blood flow to the brain, maybe something very special is happening. Maybe we're releasing chemicals, endorphins. Who knows? It's very interesting.
How I frame this when I talk to people about it, I'm like, you can talk about all the science that you want. I'm like, just go and try it. Like, all these things have to be experienced. And ultimately, what's the worst that can happen? Especially if you're in a safe environment with a good practitioner, and you should be. Like, I wouldn't just do this at home. I always recommend people go and do like a half-day Wim Hof fundamentals course, which are often like 40 quid for a half-day experience. It's not a lot of money. I'm like, go and learn, go and experience, understand the depth, and then you can take that into kind of your own practice and stuff.
Yeah.
So next steps for anyone listening to this that would like to explore the power of the breath, what resources do you have where they can go and have a look, have a play?
Yeah, so we've just actually, it's perfect timing, we've just created something called breathwork, the Biohacker's Breathwork Secrets Guide. So it's 5 evidence-based techniques for increasing energy, creativity, and so we've referenced studies and different people that I've had on the podcast, and that's completely free. So I'll drop the link down below so people can just click on it and they'll get access to that little book. It'll also then take you to the YouTube channel, so you've got access to 400 videos. Every breathing exercise you can think of is on there. We've got 150 podcasts with the world's top experts, yogis and authors and scientists and all these different things as well. So there's a lot of resources on Take a Deep Breath, and anybody that's interested in going to that like next level and they want to have a consultation with me, we can book those in. I'll give you the link for that, and we can talk about whether or not bespoke breath coaching might be something that's good for you.
Amazing. And your website is takeadeepbreath.co.uk?
.co.uk, yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I love breath work so much that I can see that one day I'll do a course in it, or maybe more than one. I know that my future has different skills that I want to flex to help people. And I've always valued curating experiences for people. I've been on a lot of retreats and experiences that take you out of your normal environment, take you to somewhere that's different. You're around like-minded people. You've got amazing coaches and facilitators. And that's where amazing change happens very quickly, when you're taken out of your normal environment. And I know that one day I'll probably go back to doing some things like that. And the breath, I think, is an amazingly transformative tool. And thank you for coming on the show today and shining the light on it with me.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And for everyone listening to this show, check the links below. Mike's YouTube channel is an absolute gold mine. I use it whenever I do Wim Hof breath work and other stuff. And I probably now need to explore some of the other videos he's done. But go and be an awesome human. Goodbye.